They're trying to poison the mind of the American voter. Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign.
If 5% of the people think it's true, and maybe 10% think we don't win.
So the dates on those public remarks from Trump, October 22nd, October 14th, both those were entered into evidence today. Lachlan, this testimony also presented to the jury. Prosecutors, in the summer of 2016, did you come to learn about the release of something known as the Access Hollywood tape? Keith Davidson, yes. What impact, if any, did the release of the Access Hollywood tape on interest in the Stormy Daniels story? Answer from Keith Davidson, as far as I'm aware, it had tremendous impact. Before Access Hollywood tape came out, there was very little, if any, interest that Gina was trying to sell the Stormy Daniels story. It wasn't until the Access Hollywood tape that the interest reached a crescendo. Tell us who Gina is and tell us the significance of that in your view.
So that's Gina Rodriguez, who was a manager in Los Angeles, also, as David Pecker testified last week, a key source for Dylan Howard. And she was repping Stormy Daniels, as well as a number of other different people. But she gets in touch with Dylan Howard in the summer of 16, shopping Stormy's story. But there's little interest then. And then, again, why the timeline is so essential here, there becomes a lot of interest right after the Access Hollywood tape.
Vaughn, again, Access Hollywood tape comes out. My reporting from someone who was in debate prep with Trump when that dropped was that the thing Trump wanted to do least was go upstairs and face Melania. When he finally did, the story I heard is she was in a white bathrobe and she was crying when they got upstairs. And what Trump kept saying in the elevator up was, is that Trump on the tape talking about himself in the third person? This was a crisis for his campaign. Reince Priebus, who was on the Trump campaign, wanted to take him off the ticket. Nobody would go on the Sunday shows except Rudy. And a lot of people thought the campaign was over. Enter the Stormy Daniels story.
And it was a Republican Party that was still trying to justify largely the crassness of Donald Trump and the man who had suddenly become their nominee rather unexpectedly. For much of the brass that continued to operate inside the Republican Party, from Speaker Paul Ryan to Texas Senator Ted Cruz to Marco Rubio to Reince Priebus, Sean Spicer, these were folks that had long been a part of this Republican Party predating Donald Trump. And look, Mike Pence joined the ticket as the evangelical Christian from Indiana, who is supposed to go and make the case to millions of Americans that this was a good, decent Christian man, Donald Trump, that he is worthy of your vote. And this moment only raised the specter for them of the difficulty of making that case and potentially jeopardizing their own credibility beyond, with the expectation that Donald Trump loses in November, beyond that, because at one point in time, they had stood on stage and defended Donald Trump or his actions. And, I was with Mike Pence there on that very day. We landed in Indiana. He canceled the campaign, stopped the following day in Wisconsin. This was a moment where there was talk of whether Mike Pence is going to stay on the ticket or not. This was a turbulent period of time. I remember even there was a campaign event in Ohio where Jim Jordan came, and it was kind of like, oh, Congressman Jim Jordan is actually here, right? And now it's kind of funny to look back on that moment that anybody would question that Jim Jordan would come to an event, a Trump campaign event, let alone one with Mike Pence. But that was the substance at the time, was being surprised that Jim Jordan was willing to still stick his neck out for Donald Trump after the Access Hollywood tape. I mean, these were dire times here. And for those following weeks, it was one of those where folks were talking, I remember among journalists, who's going to run in 2020 on the Republican side. It wasn't even about Donald Trump. And at that point in time, I mean, having another story drop at that point, talk about the final explosion. I mean, it would have been incomprehensible almost at that point.
Correct. And I guess, Andrew Weissman, the legal significance of this sort of political context is that even Trump believed this to be the case. Because Trump, after David Pecker said, quote, I am not a bank, end quote, became the bank. And that's why the testimony that began the day today was with Michael Cohen's banker. And again, anyone that's dealt with Michael Cohen could arrive at any of these personal conclusions. But to your point and Harry's point about the crux of the crime is around the payment that was fraudulently presented to cover up payments to women to impact the election. And I want to read you a little more testimony that goes exactly to Trump's motives to do that, to commit those financial fraud crimes. What did you say? The prosecutor asked. These are texts between Keith Davidson and Dylan Howard on October 8th, right after the Access Hollywood tape comes out. Answer: I said Trump is effed. You wrote the whole word out. I did. What prompted you to say that? The Access Hollywood tape. How did Dylan Howard respond? Answer: wave the white flag. It's over, people. Even in Trump's world, it was, quote, over. And Stormy Daniels would have been the final nail in the coffin, Andrew.
Look, the defense has a very, very hard road here to come up with some plausible story, a narrative that is different, because you have to disbelieve, as you pointed out, too many witnesses and too many sources of evidence. You have to believe that all of this was going on to benefit Donald Trump. He just happened to benefit, but he didn't know about it. And it all took him by surprise. And yet it also was not just benefiting him, it was benefiting him, particularly with respect to Stormy Daniels, at a time that, as you and Vaughn are talking about, was so absolutely critical to his campaign. And you now have, in his own words, the jury hearing that he thought it was critical to his campaign. So you would really have to believe that Michael Cohen did all of this and then somehow was reimbursed and is having all of these phone calls with Donald Trump, but none of this was anything that Donald Trump knew anything about at all. I mean, it just becomes so implausible as to why you would be doing that. I mean, remember, Michael Cohen had sort of bragging rights for this. In other words, this isn't something that he would sheepishly tell Donald Trump he's doing under this theory. He'd be like going, look what I did for you, boss, like a dog coming in with a pheasant in its mouth. Like, I was able to come up with the money to pay off Stormy Daniels and be the bank that David Pecker was refusing. So it's like, I am your new David Pecker, and I actually took out a frigging home equity line of credit in order to do it. So, I just think that it's a very hard job to figure out what is the counter narrative that is remotely plausible here.